Yes.
Yes. Is your advice, because we have here 2/3 of very young people, but what is affecting them is the application. But especially when it's application of immorality through the electronics. Do you have any advice for iPods, for iPads, for iPhones, whatever? How much danger or disaster change the knowledge of truth and error through the electronics?
Oh, yeah. I think that I met yesterday, I think it was the day before, a family father who has no electronics in his house, or just a computer of his own use, under lock and key. The computer is under lock and key. The children get no electronics, no iPads, no iPods, no computers, no. I honestly think that's the wisest. There's one case where I would be quite strict. If a father can establish that principle from the beginning, when the first little child appears, no television, a telephone, but nothing else, nothing more than a telephone. I think that's the wisest. Because the magic lantern has got a tremendous seductive power. And the programmers are very corrupt. And they, into educational, supposedly educational programs, they're constantly twisted and constantly sliding downhill. They're godless, the programmers are godless people, and they have no understanding of the Catholic faith and no sympathy for the Catholic faith. They will do everything they can to get the faith out of Catholic children that have the faith. The electronics are not good. Your children need to learn reality. And this family father was... you learn virtuality with electronics. You don't learn reality. If you've learned reality for the first part of your life, and then you come across these machines, at least you've got some standard by which to judge what's going on the machines. And you've got some measure between good and evil. But if you are born and bred with these machines, you're living in virtuality. I can remember Sister Gabriel who spent 9 years the first superior of the Dominican school, girls' school in Idaho. And I remember she told me once, she launched the school when it was just a little house. And I can remember she told me the joy of herself and the other sisters when they found a little group of girls, crouched on their haunches on the earth, watching a beetle. And she said this was a triumph, because they were actually outside, their minds were on something outside of themselves and real, not just virtual. She said this was the very beginning of the school, there's a terrible problem with these girls. They're all into fantasy. They're all into telling fibs. You could call it lies. They just imagine things and then take them and talk about them as though they're true. And she said this was a very difficult problem with the girls when they began the school. And to see them actually looking at some reality, forgetting themselves, that was a triumph. Can you imagine a triumph when girls are watching a little beetle? Most of them listen to the Beatles, but that's another story, of course. This one was watching a little, and there's a real danger of the children being born and bred on virtuality and not on reality. Girls need to learn stitching, sewing, embroidery, because they're using their own hands and they're dealing with something real, which is material. Boys need to learn carpentry or to take to pieces a motorbike. It's reality. It's dirty, but it's reality. And it's complicated, and it's interesting, and it will certainly teach them something. Or carpentry, handling wood. You can't fantasize about wood. Wood has a grain. If you cut with the grain, it's going to be easier but more dangerous because the saw can easily be led. Well, of course, now you do it all with an electric saw. But in the old, you're still dealing with something which doesn't all answer to your will. Same thing with animals. The animals have a will of their own. It's not a free will like we have, but it's an instinctive will. And a human being can't tell what they're going to do. And a human being can't change necessarily what they're going to do. They can't control all of what they're going to do. A machine I control completely. And the boys and the girls get used to being in complete control. They're not going to be in complete control in life. Electronics is a bad training for life. It's a good training for making a lot of money in IT or whatever it is later, but it's a bad training for life. Do you want your children to get to heaven? That's the question. If you want to get them to heaven, get the electronics out of the house, get reality, handled reality in the house. And give them example. The children are led especially by example, and especially in religion. Where the father takes his religion seriously is where you get boy vocations, priestly vocations. I found that again and again in the seminary. The father took his religion seriously and the boy followed his father, and to the point that he finally had a vocation. But if the children are raised on virtuality, they're swimming in a dream, in a fantasy, like most people today. You can't. And this world of fantasy is led today by people, a handful of hidden people. We don't know who they are. We never see them. We never meet them. But who have a strict grip on reality and a real grip on human nature and an expert knowledge of how to manipulate human nature. And they're the ones that are manipulating all of us right now. And if we aren't in reality, we don't have a chance against them, so to speak. The faith is reality. But then again, you see exact consumerism, and now what we might call philo-consumerism, that's a love of consumerism, which is the bug that's getting the society. Consumerism is exactly the modern fantasy getting inside the Catholic Church. It has no place in the Catholic Church, which should have place for nothing but reality. But because God is real, and if your priests are not real, if their ideas are not real, they're not going to bring you to God, the real God. If they've got no idea of reality, how can they have an idea of the real God? How can their religion be real? A virtual religion will bring everybody to their virtual paradise, but the real hell. So, I'd be very strict on electronics. Certainly no television in the house. Neither for the adults nor for the children. Not even for sports. And, many people say that 20 years ago, I can remember Father Beck saying this to me, that when he was in a certain parish, maybe been 20 years ago, he could always get boys in the parish out to play a sport, like baseball or whatever. Their boys would get out there and on the field and they would play the real thing. He says today he couldn't get them away from their Nintendo games, their virtual sports. He couldn't get them away. They'd just stay at home and play the sports it's so much easier. They've given up on real sport. And for Father Beck was obviously upset by this, with reason. The children are not getting the exercise, they're not getting the comradeship, they're not getting the team spirit, they're not getting to slug one another, the boys at least. The boys need this to turn into men. And that's why we're not getting men. When the boys are born and bred on electronics, they turn into dish rags, broadly speaking. If you want more boys to be men, get them climbing trees, breaking their necks if necessary. But doing something manly, something requiring a bit of courage, something requiring a bit of daring, something requiring a bit of initiative, that's what's going to make them men. Or a bit of responsibility. Put them in charge of animals. Have some animals and put them in charge of the animals. Put the girls in charge of rabbits and put the boys in charge of lions. Nice furry rabbits.